If you had walked past the therapist's office that Tuesday evening, you would have seen something very ordinary. A woman in her mid-30s sitting on a leather couch, hands folded too tightly in her lap, a man beside her staring at the rug, and a therapist with a notebook and a practiced, neutral smile. Nothing about that room looked extraordinary, but that was the exact moment my marriage died. The therapist had asked a question about radical honesty, about choosing between past and present. My husband took a breath, looked straight ahead, and said, with no hesitation at all, "If I had to choose between you and my ex right now, I'd choose her." The air left my lungs so fast I actually heard myself inhale again, a small, ugly gasp that echoed in the quiet room. The air conditioner hummed. The leather under my palms felt too cold, too smooth, like I might slide right off the edge of my own life. Our therapist went silent. She blinked once, the way people do when they're trying to hide shock. I watched her mouth open slightly, then close. She didn't know what to say. I did. I stood up very slowly, like my bones were made of glass. My husband turned toward me, his brows drawing together, as if I was the one doing something unreasonable. "Then go choose her," I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me more than anything. He reached out, fingers brushing the sleeve of my jacket. "Wait, that's not what I pulled my arm away. I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat, in my wrists, in the tips of my fingers. 7 years of marriage, 9 years together, all of it collapsing into a single sentence I would never be able to unhear. "You just told me in couples therapy that if you had to choose, you'd pick another woman over your own wife," I said quietly. "What exactly am I supposed to do with that? Compete? Beg?" I didn't wait for an answer. I grabbed my bag, nodded once to the therapist, and walked out of that office, out of that building, and, though I didn't fully understand it yet, out of the life I thought I had. That night, he left a voicemail sobbing, begging me to come home. I listened to it once, then turned my phone off and went to sleep on a friend's couch. 4 days later, I still hadn't gone home. A week later, I was sitting in a divorce attorney's office, learning exactly how much it costs to walk away from someone who has already chosen somebody else. I didn't know it then, but that single sentence in that cold, leather couch office was about to unravel everything. Our house, our savings, our friendships, and the version of myself who believed that love and loyalty were the same thing. And yet somehow losing him would be the beginning of getting myself back. I wasn't always this version of myself, the woman who could walk out of a therapist's office and leave her entire marriage behind. For most of my adult life, I was the girl who believed in effort, in patience, in fixing things before they cracked too far. When I met Ethan, I was 27, working long hours as a project coordinator at a mid-sized tech firm. I was organized, dependable, maybe a bit too eager to prove I was good enough. Traits that made me excellent at my job and, unfortunately, far too accommodating in relationships. He was 29 back then, an engineer, quiet in that steady, comforting way that makes you think he has life figured out. I met him at a mutual friend's birthday party. He'd been sitting alone on the patio, nursing a drink and looking like he was debating whether to leave early. I remember walking outside to get some air. He looked up, offered a faint smile, and said, "You look like you hate crowds as much as I do." We talked for almost an hour, not flirting, not small talk, real conversation, childhood stories, dreams, fears we never admitted to anyone else. I'd been in a bad place emotionally back then, recovering from my own heartbreak, though I tried to hide it. He didn't push. He just listened with those steady eyes that made you feel safe. We started dating a week later, slowly at first. Movie nights on his couch, long walks around the city we both loved but experienced differently, gentle affection, warm silences, laughter that came easier and easier. And I fell in love with him the way people fall asleep, slowly, then all at once. For years, things were good. Not perfect, because nothing is, but solid. We shared chores without arguing, saved money together, supported each other's careers. We built a home we were proud of. Not huge, not glamorous, but ours. But even in those good years, there were little signs, small hesitations I ignored. Moments where I felt like I loved a little harder, tried a little more, reached a little farther. He always said he wasn't ready for kids. First he wanted a promotion. Then he wanted a more stable schedule. Then he wanted more time for us. I told myself it was reasonable. Having children is a huge step. It takes maturity to want to be ready. But sometimes, quietly, I wondered if he was planning a future with me at all. I pushed that thought away every time it came up. After all, he married me. That had to mean something. His family liked me, at least on the surface. His mother always praised my career, my maturity, my good head on my shoulders. But there was a distance in her compliments, a subtle comparison to Ethan's ex-girlfriend, a woman they'd loved, a relationship that had ended badly when she moved away for work. I used to think it was harmless nostalgia. Families do that sometimes. Looking back, I see those moments differently. I see the long shadow she cast over my marriage before I even realized it. But the real cracks didn't show until year 5. Ethan withdrew a little, not dramatically, but noticeably. He'd scroll through his phone more, keep notifications turned face down, stay later at work, brush off conversations with vague answers. And I told myself all the things women are taught to tell themselves. He's stressed, he's tired, he loves me, we just need to reconnect. So when he suggested couples therapy, I said yes immediately, because that's who I was, someone who believed in saving things, someone who believed love was worth fighting for. I didn't know then that he was already fighting for something else, or maybe someone else. And yet, despite everything, when I walked into that therapist's office for the first time, I was hopeful, nervous, but hopeful. I didn't think our marriage was perfect, but I thought it was repairable. I thought we were turning a corner. I thought we were being honest with each other. I thought I knew my husband. I didn't, not really. What I thought were little signs were actually the seeds of a truth he was too cowardly to tell me. He wasn't losing feelings, he was redirecting them. And when the therapist finally forced him to say out loud what he had kept hidden for months, maybe years, the truth hit me with a force I still feel in my bones. I wasn't the first choice. Maybe I never had been, and everything that came next began with that realization. By the time we entered our 3rd month of couples therapy, the atmosphere in our home had changed in ways I couldn't quite define, but could absolutely feel. It was like walking into a room right after an argument you weren't present for. Everything looked normal, but the air still vibrated with what had happened. Ethan had always been an introvert, but now his quiet felt different. Not peaceful, not thoughtful, just elsewhere. He started keeping his phone with him everywhere, even in the shower, even while brushing his teeth. A few times, I'd walk into the living room and he'd tilt the screen away instinctively, too fast, too guilty-looking for it to be meaningless. I'd ask what he was reading and he'd shrug, just news. But he never showed me the screen. His laugh changed too. It sounds ridiculous, but laughter reveals things. He used to laugh with his whole face, eyes creasing, shoulders relaxing, breath releasing like he was letting joy spill out. Now, sometimes at night, he'd be lying beside me, scrolling through his phone, and he'd smile at something. Just a small, private curve of the lips, not shared with me, not meant for me. When I'd ask, "What's funny?" he'd say, "Nothing important," and lock the screen. Nothing important. Funny how those 2 words have haunted me. Nothing important was always something important. We started arguing more, but the strange thing was, we weren't arguing about big things. It was always something tiny. The dishes in the sink, the way I folded laundry, the brand of coffee I bought, whether I left the hall light dimmed or fully off. Arguments that weren't about dishes or laundry or coffee at all. Arguments that sounded like 2 people speaking the same language but not understanding each other anymore. I sensed him slipping, but I didn't know what he was slipping toward. At dinner one night, I asked gently, "Do you still want to have kids someday?" He froze, fork halfway to his mouth. "I don't know," he said flatly. "Can we not talk about this right now?" He didn't look angry. He looked trapped, like the question was a door he didn't want to open. At the time, I thought it was fear of responsibility, fear of change. Now I wonder if the truth was something else. He couldn't picture a future with me because his heart was already rehearsing a different one. His mother started calling more often around that time too, always with an overly cheerful voice that felt stretched too thin. "Sweetheart, you know relationships have ups and downs," she'd say. "Men go through phases. You just have to be patient." Patient. Such a polite word for accept less than you deserve. Once we were at his parents' house for dinner, and I caught his mother looking at me with a softness that wasn't kindness. It was pity. That was the moment something cold bloomed in my stomach. Pity only comes when someone knows something you don't. I replay that evening more often than I'd like to admit. His sister, who'd always been warm to me, began acting strangely too. She'd hug me hello, but stiffly, like guilt made her muscles tighten. She'd change the topic every time conversations drifted toward relationships. And every time Ethan stepped out of the room, she'd look at me with something that wasn't judgment, but wasn't reassurance either. Little signs, little shifts, little silences. They add up. Couples therapy, ironically, made things more intense. We were talking more, sure, but the more we talked, the more I realized Ethan had a whole emotional world he wasn't letting me into anymore. I'd look at him on the therapy couch, saying all the right things about communication and growth and reconnection, but his eyes would drift. His hands would fidget. His smile wouldn't reach his eyes. The therapist kept reminding us about safe spaces for truth, but I sensed Ethan had truths he wasn't planning to share, not with her, not with me, maybe not even with himself. The worst part? The more distant he became, the harder I tried. I initiated dates, left him sweet notes, cooked his favorite meals, asked about his day, tried to hold his hand more. And each time he pulled away, even subtly, it felt like my heart was leaning over a cliff while his stayed safely standing back. There was one night, just a week before the catastrophic therapy session, when we lay in bed facing opposite directions. I whispered, "Do you still love me the same way?" He didn't turn around. He didn't touch me. He just said, "Can we talk about this later?" Later never came. Instead, the truth came all at once, crashing and merciless, in a beige therapist's office with a humming air conditioner. The quiet signs I ignored were never quiet at all. I just didn't want to hear them. Last Tuesday, 6:20 p.m., sharp, like every week, we sat on the same uncomfortable leather couch in our therapist's office, the kind that looks expensive but feels like judgment every time you shift your weight. Ethan was unusually still beside me, his hands clasped tightly enough that his knuckles peaked white. I remember thinking he looked like a man preparing for impact. Not a good sign. But I didn't say anything. Our therapist, Dr. Avery, smiled gently at us and said she wanted to try something called radical honesty. A safe space for truth, she called it. Raw feelings without interruption. I agreed before Ethan even looked up, because naively, I still believed honesty would save us. Dr. Avery asked who wanted to begin. Ethan nodded toward me. "You go first." So I did. I talked about feeling disconnected, about feeling like we were roommates instead of partners, about missing the warmth and partnership we once had. I didn't say anything cruel, just truth, soft truth. Truth meant to help us heal. Ethan listened with an unreadable expression, jaw tight, eyes down. Then it was his turn. Dr. Avery asked him the same questions: what he felt, what he feared, what he hoped to understand. He talked about stress at work, about feeling unfulfilled, about how life wasn't what he expected in his 30s. None of it shocked me. We danced around these subjects before. But then Dr. Avery, in her calm, soothing therapist voice, asked, "If you could go back and make a different choice about your life, would you?" At first, Ethan did not answer. He just froze, completely still. The kind of stillness that makes your stomach sink because you recognize it instinctively. Someone is about to hurt you, and they don't want to say the words out loud. Finally, he spoke barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I think about my ex." My entire body went cold. Not angry, cold. The kind of cold that wraps around your spine when you realize something foundational is crumbling. I knew exactly who he meant. The woman before me. The one who'd broken his heart and moved away. The one I'd unknowingly been compared to for years. Dr. Avery nodded gently. "Tell us more about that." I stared straight ahead, breathing carefully. Ethan continued, his voice steadier now that the first domino had fallen. "I've been following her on social media. She moved back to the area about a year ago. She's doing well." He swallowed. "We've messaged a few times, just catching up. Nothing inappropriate." Every word hit me like a stone. He hadn't told me any of this. Not one message, not one update, not one hint that she'd reappeared in his emotional orbit. Dr. Avery turned to me. "How does this make you feel?" Before I could speak, Ethan kept going, like a dam splitting open, water rushing wherever it pleased. "I don't know if I married the right person." My breath caught, my vision dimmed around the edges. "I love you," he said, finally looking at me. "I do. But I don't know if I'm in love with you anymore. When I think about her, I feel alive, the way I used to feel. Alive. Alive with someone else. Alive at the thought of someone who never chose him in the first place." Dr. Avery leaned forward. "This is important work. If you had to choose right now, in this exact moment, between your wife and your ex, what would your gut say? I wanted him to pause, to hesitate, to look at me with confusion or conflict or fear of losing me, anything other than certainty. He didn't even blink. If I had to choose right now, he said, I'd choose her. Time stopped. Literally stopped. No breath, no heartbeat, no sound except the air conditioner humming behind my head. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe 5 seconds, maybe a full lifetime, before something inside me clicked into place. Not rage, not sorrow, just clarity, sharp and merciless. I stood up. My legs felt steady, which surprised me. My voice came out low and controlled. Then go choose her. Ethan's eyes widened. Wait, that's not... I stepped back from his reaching hand. You told me, in the one room where honesty is supposed to save us, that you'd choose another woman. Without hesitation, without doubt. My lips trembled once, but my voice didn't break. I'm not competing for my own husband. Dr. Avery watched silently, empathy softening her eyes, but she didn't intervene. Therapists can't stop emotional truths. They can only bear witness. I picked up my bag, walked to the door, opened it. Behind me, Ethan whispered, "Please don't leave." I didn't look back. Some endings require you to keep your eyes forward. When the door shut behind me, the sound was small, almost gentle, but it echoed like a gunshot through the life I thought I had. When I stepped out of the therapist's office, the hallway lights felt too bright, bright enough to expose every crack in me I was trying to hold together. I walked slowly, mechanically, like my legs were moving out of obligation rather than choice. The knot in my throat was so tight I couldn't swallow. Outside, the evening air hit my face, cold and sharp. I stood still for a moment beneath the parking lot lights, breathing in air that smelled faintly of car exhaust and asphalt cooling after sunset. Anything to avoid feeling the thing clawing at my chest. Shock. Raw, undiluted shock. Not because he said he'd thought about his ex. Not because he'd messaged her behind my back. Not because he'd questioned our marriage. But because he didn't hesitate, not even for a second. 9 years of my life. 7 years of being his wife. And not one flicker of doubt crossed his face when Dr. Avery asked that final question. I walked to my car on autopilot. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys twice before finally unlocking the door. When I got inside, I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark window. Eyes too wide, lips pressed tight. A woman trying to understand how her entire life had changed in less than a minute. My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. "Please wait. We should talk about this." I turned the phone face down. I couldn't look at him. Not in text, not in person, not in the version of my life where I stay and pretend his words didn't crack something irreparable. I kept replaying the moment, his voice steady, his expression calm, his choice clear. What hurt the most wasn't the confession. It was the certainty. That certainty meant he had already chosen her long before that question was asked. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. And then something even worse hit me. Had I ignored the truth all along? Had every late-night phone tilt, every unexplained smile, every emotional withdrawal been him drifting silently towards someone else? How long had I been the only one fighting for this marriage? How long had I been holding on to something he'd already emotionally left? My chest tightened painfully. Grief, yes, but also humiliation. I was the woman sitting in therapy trying to save a marriage, while my husband was fantasizing about a life with someone he hadn't seen in years. Tears finally spilled over, not loud or dramatic, just silent, exhausted tears that slid down my cheeks and dripped onto my shirt. I wasn't crying because I wanted him back. I was crying because I finally understood I had already lost him. When I finally started the engine, my hands were steadier. Not entirely, but enough. I drove to my closest friend's apartment, Lena, the kind of friend who knows when not to ask questions. She opened the door before I even knocked twice, looked at my face, and immediately pulled me into a hug. "What happened?" she whispered. I tried to speak, but the words shattered on my tongue, so she guided me inside, sat me on her couch, handed me a blanket, and waited. When I finally told her every word, every detail, every piece of that therapy session, her expression shifted from shock to disbelief to protective anger. "He said that? Out loud? In front of you?" I nodded, without hesitating. Her hands curled into fists. "You don't deserve that. Not even close." I didn't respond, because a deeper question was eating at me. Had I missed the earliest warnings? Had I been so hopeful, so committed, so trusting that I forgot to notice he wasn't meeting me halfway. I lay awake on Lena's couch that night, staring at the ceiling while her apartment hummed softly around me. And even though exhaustion weighed down every part of me, sleep refused to come. My mind kept circling the same thought, sharp and relentless. When someone tells you who they truly are, what excuse do you have left to stay blind? Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail from Ethan. I didn't play it. Not then. Not while my heart was still bruised and raw. Because deep inside, beneath the hurt and the shock, something else was beginning to form. A fragile but unmistakable clarity. I wasn't going back. Not after hearing him choose someone else. Not after realizing how long he'd been slipping away. Not after understanding that loving him wasn't the same as being loved back. It would take time for that clarity to grow strong enough to guide my next steps, but it was there, quiet, steady, waiting. And it was the beginning of the end, or maybe the beginning of the beginning. The morning after the therapy session, I woke up on Lena's couch with a stiff neck, swollen eyes, and that strange, disorienting moment where you can't tell if something was a nightmare or your real life. But then my phone, still face down on the coffee table, lit up with a flood of missed calls and messages. Reality. Sharp, intrusive, unavoidable. Ethan had left 3 more voicemails, 7 missed calls, 5 text messages. All variations of the same desperate theme. Please talk to me. It didn't come out right. Please come home. Lena handed me a mug of coffee. You don't have to listen to anything until you're ready. I nodded, but readiness wasn't the issue. I just didn't want to. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Around noon, I finally played the first voicemail. His voice cracked halfway through. Baby, please, I didn't mean it like that. The therapist put me on the spot. I panicked. I love you. Please come home. Panic doesn't produce confidence. Panic doesn't produce certainty. If anything, panic makes people cling to comfort, not abandon it. He wasn't panicking in that office. He was telling the truth he'd rehearsed privately for a long time. I deleted the voicemail. The escalation began slowly that day, like the first sparks of a fire, then spread into a full blaze over the next week. By the 3rd day, his mother called. I didn't answer. She called again, and again, and again. Finally, she left a voicemail that made my stomach turn. Sweetheart, marriages go through moments of weakness. Ethan was vulnerable. You need to be strong for both of you. Come home and fix this. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene. Translation. Swallow your pain quietly, so no one has to acknowledge what he did. That evening, Ethan's sister texted me from an unknown number. You're overreacting. He loves you. People say stupid things under pressure. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing a single reply. Stupid things reveal truths. I didn't hear from her again. When Ethan realized begging wasn't working, the tone shifted. We've been married 7 years. Don't throw it away. You're not even giving me a chance to explain. You're not being fair. Fair. A fascinating word coming from a man who emotionally reconnected with his ex while I was trying to rebuild us through therapy. I told Lena, he wants me to comfort him for hurting me. She shook her head slowly. That's not love. That's entitlement. On day 5, Dr. Avery emailed me. A surprisingly heartfelt message. I understand your reaction. Please know you handled yourself with dignity. If you wish to continue individual sessions, I am here to support you. I read that line over again. You handled yourself with dignity. Funny how one sentence from a stranger can feel more supportive than 1,000 pleas from someone you shared a life with. 2 days later, a mutual friend texted me something that made my blood run ice cold. Hey, I don't want to stir the pot, but Ethan's ex came back over a year ago. They've been DMing for months. He told a few people he was confused about his marriage. Months, not days, not weeks, months. My hands started shaking. Not from heartbreak, from clarity. I'd been in therapy trying to save my marriage while he'd been conducting a 6-month emotional affair in the shadows. Suddenly, every late-night phone tilt, every secret smile, every dismissive answer, every moment he pulled away, all of it snapped into sharp focus. He wasn't confused. He was preparing an escape route. And I, blindly loyal, had been patching holes in a ship he'd already decided to abandon. I didn't want to see him, but he forced it by calling from another number one night. The second I heard his voice, I could tell he'd been crying. Please, can we meet and talk? No, I said softly but firmly. Why are you doing this? I was honest. Isn't that what you wanted? I closed my eyes. You weren't honest, Ethan. You were exposed. Silence. I continued, each word steady. You weren't reconnecting with me. You were comparing me, measuring me, fantasizing about a life that didn't include me. That's not fair, I cut him off. And messaging her for months? Hiding it? Let me guess, you were just being honest then too? Dead silence, the kind that confirms everything. He finally whispered. I was confused. No, I said, you were careful. I ended the call. I blocked the number. That night, Lena sat beside me on the couch, her hand covering mine. You're stronger than you think, she whispered. But I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow, like my heart had been scooped out, but the ache remained. Mutual friends started dropping hints. Some took his side. Some took mine. Some stayed quiet. But the hardest wave came from his mother, a long text that blurred the lines between guilt-tripping and emotional manipulation. You're going to break this family. If you leave Ethan, you'll regret it. He's the best thing that ever happened to you. I almost laughed aloud. The best thing? The man who chose another woman without blinking? No. The best thing that ever happened to me would be learning to walk away. Something unexpected happened during all this chaos. A shift, a hardening, a clarity. For the first time in 9 years, I wasn't smoothing things over, wasn't apologizing for emotions that were justified, wasn't shrinking to protect someone else's comfort. I became quieter but sharper, calmer but firmer, devastated but resolute. And that version of me terrified Ethan, because he finally realized he couldn't manipulate me into staying. The more he begged, the more he explained, the more he cried, the stronger the steel inside me grew. It wasn't bitterness, it wasn't revenge, it was self-preservation. The escalation wasn't just external, it was internal too. I was changing, evolving, beginning to reclaim the parts of myself I'd set aside to keep a man who had already emotionally left. And that change, quiet, powerful, unstoppable, was only the beginning of what came next. There's a point in every heartbreak, every true, soul-level betrayal, where the pain stops being sharp and becomes something else entirely. Heavy, suffocating, a weight pressing so hard on your chest that even breathing feels like a decision. For me, that moment came late, far later than the night of the therapy session, later than his desperate voicemails, later even than discovering he had been messaging his ex for months. It came the night I realized I wasn't mourning my husband. I was mourning the woman I used to be. It was almost 2 a.m. Lena had gone to sleep hours earlier, but I lay awake on her couch, curled beneath a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender detergent and safety I didn't feel. My phone buzzed again. Another blocked number, another voicemail. I didn't check it. I just stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, listening to the soft whir of its blades slicing through the quiet. My mind was a storm, not loud, just relentless. Every moment of the past 9 years rewound itself. The night he first kissed me, the tremble in his hands, the warmth in his eyes. Our wedding day, my heart pounding as I walked toward him, convinced I was walking into forever. The nights we stayed up talking about the future, the house we'd buy, the vacations we'd take, the family we might build. I remembered all of it, every promise, every smile, every soft morning when he brushed my hair from my face and kissed my forehead before leaving for work. I brought a hand to my mouth as something inside me cracked, painfully, like thin ice giving way. I wasn't crying over the man who chose someone else. I was crying over the woman who had trusted him so completely that she never prepared for this possibility. The woman who built her life around someone who didn't build his around her. I curled onto my side, clutching the blanket to my chest as the truth settled heavier and heavier. I had been loving him with my whole heart, while he was giving only the pieces left over from someone else. That realization broke me more than his confession ever could. In the days that followed, loneliness wrapped around me like a second skin. People talk about heartbreak as if it's dramatic, screaming, throwing things, storming out. But real heartbreak is quiet. It's brushing your teeth in a borrowed bathroom and staring at a reflection you don't recognize. It's eating dinner, but not tasting anything. It's checking your phone out of habit before remembering the person you're hoping to hear from isn't someone you should listen to anymore. It's waking up and forgetting, for one blissful half-second, that your marriage is collapsing. Then remembering all over again. I avoided social media, avoided mutual friends, avoided anything that made me feel like I had to explain myself, justify myself, defend myself. Because how do you explain something like this? My husband told me he'd choose someone else over me. No embellishment, no nuance, just the truth that gutted me. Even Lena, gentle, supportive, endlessly patient Lena, couldn't reach the part of me that was hurting most. She held me through panic attacks. She cooked for me when I couldn't force myself to eat. She whispered, "You didn't deserve this," every time I doubted myself. But healing isn't something you can outsource. Every night I lay there feeling like I was drowning in a sea of memory, loss, and unanswered questions. The worst part wasn't even the loneliness. It was the self-blame. Maybe I should have noticed sooner. Maybe I should have asked harder questions. Maybe I should have fought more. Maybe I wasn't enough. Those thoughts turned into a vicious loop that played on repeat until my chest ached from trying not to sob. I replayed every moment of emotional distance and asked myself what I could have done differently. If I had worn something prettier that day, if I had been more exciting, if I had planned better dates, if I hadn't been so tired after work, if I had paid more attention. It didn't matter that logically I knew his emotional cheating wasn't my fault. Pain doesn't care about logic. There was one night I broke completely. Full collapse, silent screaming into the pillow, body shaking, tears soaking the sheets. I whispered into the darkness, "Why wasn't I enough?" It was the lowest, most painful question I had ever asked myself, and in that moment, I believed it. I believed maybe I truly wasn't enough. Not for him, not for the marriage, not for the life we had built together. It was the most dangerous moment of all, because that was the night I almost called him back. Almost. My finger hovered over his number, heart pounding, vision blurry, a desperate craving for familiar comfort, even from the person who hurt me. But then, just as I almost pressed the call button, I remembered the therapist's office, the stillness in him, the certainty, the absence of hesitation. And a voice inside me, small but fierce, whispered, "Don't beg for someone who didn't choose you." I dropped the phone. I cried until I fell asleep, but I didn't call him. And that small act of self-preservation, made in the darkest moment of the entire ordeal, would eventually become the seed of something stronger. Self-worth, clarity, and the beginning of a new version of me. But that night I felt shattered beyond repair. The shift didn't come dramatically. No triumphant music, no sudden burst of confidence, not even a moment of clarity that struck like lightning. It came quietly, slowly, almost gently, like the universe nudging me toward a truth I had been too broken to see. It started with a conversation I didn't expect. About 10 days after I left Ethan, I received a text from someone I hadn't spoken to in months, a mutual friend named Jordan. He wasn't particularly close to either of us, which made his message feel strangely neutral. "Hey, I don't want to get dragged into anything, but you deserve to know this. Ethan's ex? She's been dating someone for months. Serious relationship. He wasn't her plan, even if he thought she might be his." I stared at the message for a long time. It didn't feel satisfying. It didn't feel vindicating. It felt illuminating. This whole time, while I was fighting for my marriage, while Ethan was emotionally drifting toward a fantasy, she had already moved on. He wasn't choosing a real person. He was choosing a memory, a what if, a version of his past he romanticized because it didn't require effort, accountability, or growth. He wasn't choosing her. He was choosing escape. And the moment that truth clicked into place, something inside me loosened, like a knot pulled too tight, finally easing. A few days after Jordan's message, I decided to meet with Dr. Avery alone. I needed perspective. Professional, unbiased perspective. When I sat down on that familiar leather couch, alone this time, she regarded me with a softness I hadn't noticed before. "How are you?" she asked gently. I hesitated, then told her everything. The messages, the family pressure, the lies that stretched back months, the way I shattered, the way I almost called him during my darkest moment. She listened without interrupting, just like she had during the couples sessions, but this time her eyes held sympathy, not clinical neutrality. When I finished, she folded her hands and said something I will never forget. "You didn't lose your marriage in that session. You discovered you were the only one still in it." I felt tears burn hot behind my eyes. But this time, they weren't from pain. They were from recognition. "He wasn't being honest that day," she continued. "He was being truthful. Truth comes from clarity, not confusion. And his clarity was that he still wanted something he couldn't have and didn't value what he did have." I swallowed hard. "So what do I do now?" Dr. Avery smiled sadly. "You accept that his choice had nothing to do with your worth, and then you choose yourself with the same certainty he chose someone else." Choose myself. Such simple advice. Such impossible advice. And yet, something inside me shifted. For the first time, the idea didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like rescue. That evening, I returned to Lena's apartment feeling strangely calm. Still hurting, yes. Still grieving. but steadier than I had since the night everything fell apart. I went to the bathroom, turned on the light, and looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. My cheeks were thinner. My eyes looked older. But behind the exhaustion was something I thought I'd lost. Resolve, strength, self-recognition. I whispered to my reflection, "You deserve better than what he gave you." And for once, I believed myself. Later that night, I sat on the couch with a pen and notepad. I wrote 2 columns, what I lost and what I gained by leaving. The lost column filled quickly. Home, stability, routine, 9 years of memories, the version of the future I had clung to. But the gained column, that surprised me. Self-respect, truth, freedom from someone who didn't choose me, clarity about my own strength, the ability to build a life on solid ground instead of broken promises. When I looked at the 2 lists, I realized something profound. I wasn't losing a marriage. I was shedding an illusion. And for the first time, the idea of divorce didn't feel like failure. It felt like liberation. When Ethan eventually reached me through a new number, begging for one more chance to talk, I didn't feel anger or fear or grief. I felt done, completely peacefully done. You said you would choose her, I reminded him softly. No amount of backtracking changes that truth. That was a mistake, he insisted. I didn't mean it. I smiled sadly, even though he couldn't see me. You meant it. You just regret it now that reality isn't matching your fantasy. But I'm not a consolation prize, and I won't be your safety net. He was silent, then whispered, I never thought you'd leave. I exhaled. That was your real mistake. And at that exact moment, the final piece clicked into place. He didn't break me, he revealed me. I hung up the phone, blocked the number, and felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone, but because it finally had direction. For weeks I had felt like I was free falling. But now I felt my feet touch solid ground. The heartbreak was still there, but it wasn't controlling me anymore. The betrayal hurt, but it didn't define me anymore. The loneliness lingered, but it didn't frighten me anymore. I was reclaiming my life, piece by piece, truth by truth, choice by choice. And the next choice I made was the most important one. I contacted a divorce attorney. I began the paperwork. I began my freedom. This was the turning point. The moment I stopped trying to save someone who wasn't fighting for me and started fighting for myself. Divorce isn't a single explosion. It's a chain reaction. One detonation followed by shock waves that ripple outward, taking down everything unstable in their path. And when the dust finally settled, I saw clearly, I wasn't the one whose life had collapsed. He was. Because the moment I chose myself, everything he'd taken for granted began to unravel. My first meeting with the divorce attorney was strangely empowering. I explained what happened. Every detail of the therapy session, the emotional affair, the lies, the guilt, the certainty in his voice when he said he'd choose her. The attorney listened with a calm, almost clinical expression. When I finished, she nodded and said, Legally, emotional betrayal doesn't change the outcome, but psychologically, it changes everything. I signed the retainer, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted peace. The moment the papers were filed, the fallout began. The first call wasn't from Ethan, it was from his mother. She didn't even say hello. Her voice came through the phone, sharp and furious. How dare you serve my son divorce papers like he's a criminal, after everything he's done for you? I almost laughed. Everything he's done for me? The bare minimum? The betrayal wrapped in silence? I kept my voice steady. He told me he would choose another woman over me. The divorce is the natural consequence. Her breath hitched. You're being dramatic. No, I replied, I'm being decisive. Then she delivered the line I will never forget. You're ruining his life. I closed my eyes and whispered, he ruined his own life when he stopped valuing me. I hung up, blocked her number. Ethan's sister started texting me from multiple unknown numbers. 3, then 5, then 8. Always with the same message. Be an adult and fix your marriage. You're humiliating him. Don't be selfish. Selfish. As if demanding fidelity was selfish. As if respecting myself was selfish. As if leaving someone who chose another woman was selfish. Her persistence only made one thing clear. They wanted me to absorb the discomfort of his actions so he wouldn't have to. I didn't respond to any of her messages. Silence was my new boundary. One of Ethan's closest friends, someone I barely knew, sent me a short text that surprised me. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. Ethan hasn't been honest with himself for a long time. I stared at that message for minutes, not because it hurt, but because it confirmed something I had begun to suspect. He had been lost long before he lost me. Through the grapevine, the full truth about his ex emerged, And it was worse than I imagined. She hadn't just moved on. She wasn't just dating. She was serious, committed, in love, meeting families, planning vacations, a future with someone who wasn't Ethan. And when she learned he had destroyed his marriage over her, she didn't respond, didn't comfort him, didn't reciprocate his emotional investment. She simply went silent. He'd risked everything for a fantasy that didn't want him and never intended to. When I heard this, my heart didn't swell with vindication. It sank with realization. He wasn't a villain, he was weak, and weakness masquerading as longing had cost him everything. 2 weeks after the divorce filing, he managed to reach me from a new number. His voice sounded hollow. I messed up. I said nothing. Silence, after all, forces the truth out. He continued, my ex, she's with someone. She's serious about him. I inhaled slowly. And now you want your wife back? The silence on his end was confirmation. Then he whispered, I thought she still cared. His voice cracked. I ruined everything for nothing. For a moment, I'll admit it, I felt a flicker of pity. Not for him, but for the life he could have had if he'd chosen reliability over nostalgia, reality over fantasy, effort over escapism. But pity is not love, and brokenness is not obligation. I answered softly, you didn't ruin everything for nothing. You ruined everything because you didn't value what you had. He cried, but I didn't. When I hung up, I felt calm. A kind of calm that comes from finally understanding the truth. The heartbreak was real, but the loss was not mine. It was his. Mutual friends started to drift toward me, not because I asked them to, but because the truth always finds light. One friend said, he told us he was just confused, but now it's obvious he blindsided you. Another told me, he's been a mess. He keeps saying he didn't expect you to leave. That line, didn't expect you to leave, meant everything. He didn't think I had the strength to walk away. He underestimated me. He misjudged me. He didn't know me at all. And that was the real tragedy of our marriage. I saw him clearly, but he never saw me at all. Once the full story reached his parents, that he had been messaging his ex for months, that she didn't want him, that he'd thrown away our marriage out of cowardice, their tune changed sharply. His mother stopped calling me. His father stopped defending him. His sister's harassment disappeared. I didn't rejoice. This wasn't a victory. This was the natural consequence of truth. When the house sold and we stood in the same room for the final signing, he looked at me like a man seeing a ghost, someone familiar, but impossibly far away. You seem different, he whispered, almost afraid. And I realized he was right. I was different. I wasn't the woman begging for answers anymore. I wasn't the woman doubting herself. I wasn't the woman clinging to a marriage he had already left. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone who finally understood what she deserved. So I lifted my chin and said, I chose myself. You taught me how. He flinched, actually flinched, like the words were physical. And for the first time, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. Everything that collapsed, his dignity, his family's faith in him, his friendships, his fantasy, it wasn't my burden. He lit the match. He fueled the fire. He watched it burn. And I walked out of the flames untouched. Healing didn't arrive in a dramatic wave. There was no sunrise moment where everything suddenly felt whole again. Instead, healing came in fragments, small, quiet pieces of myself returning one by one. The first piece came the day I moved into my own place, a modest one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a building that smelled faintly of fresh paint and laundry detergent. It wasn't the home I had dreamed of. It wasn't the life I had planned. But when I carried the first box across the threshold, a surprising feeling washed over me. Relief. Not joy, not triumph, just relief. Like setting down a weight I had carried for years, without realizing how heavy it truly was. I unpacked slowly that first day, folding clothes into drawers, placing books on shelves, arranging a new life, one object at a time. Every item I put away felt like reclaiming space inside myself. No more walking on emotional eggshells, no more competing with ghosts, no more shrinking to make someone else feel whole. In the quiet of my empty apartment, I heard something I hadn't heard in a long time. My own thoughts, my own hopes, my own voice, steady, present, alive. For months, I had defined myself by the collapse of my marriage. I saw myself through the lens of that therapist's office, a woman reduced to silence by the man she loved. But as the days passed, I rediscovered things I had forgotten. I loved cooking elaborate meals for myself. I loved taking long walks with music blasting in my ears. I loved reading late into the night with candles lit. I loved the quiet. not the suffocating quiet of emotional distance, but the peaceful quiet of being alone without being lonely. And slowly the truth became undeniable. I liked who I was without him, more than I ever liked who I had to be with him. A week after the divorce finalized, Ethan sent me a final email. I almost didn't open it, but some part of me wanted closure. He wrote, "I'm sorry. Not for saying what I said. I meant it in the moment, but for not being brave enough to tell you sooner. You deserve someone who chose you fully. I couldn't be that man. I hope one day you forgive me." I stared at the words for a long time. Then I closed the email, archived it, and never responded. Forgiveness isn't something you give to ease someone else's guilt. Forgiveness is something you eventually give yourself. And I wasn't there yet, but I was getting closer. People kept asking whether I would date again. When are you going to move on? Are you ready to meet someone new? You're too young to be alone forever. But here's what they didn't understand. I didn't need someone new. I needed someone true. And for the first time in my adult life, that someone was me. I started therapy on my own. I journaled. I exercised. I set boundaries. I learned how to love myself without conditions. And slowly, piece by piece, the version of me that had disappeared inside my marriage returned. Brighter, stronger, wiser. There are lessons heartbreak teaches you. Lessons you can't learn any other way. Here are the ones that carve themselves into my bones. When someone shows you they would choose someone else, let them go. Don't beg. Don't chase. Don't audition for a role you already earned. And love is not proven through suffering. You don't owe anyone your self-destruction. And emotional betrayal leaves marks deeper than physical distance. But those marks can become maps, leading you back to yourself. And walking away is not weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing a woman can do. Closure doesn't come from the person who hurt you. It comes from deciding you deserve better. And the final, most important truth. You are not defined by the one who didn't choose you. You are defined by the moment you chose yourself. Now, when I look back on that day in the therapist's office, the beige couch, the humming air conditioner, the sentence that broke everything, I no longer feel my stomach drop. I feel gratitude, not for the pain, not for the betrayal, but for the clarity. He freed me by choosing her, even if she never wanted him, even if it wasn't real. His certainty gave me my own. And walking out of that room, walking away from the version of myself that clung to people who didn't cherish her, was the first step toward the life I'm building now. A life rooted in truth, in strength, in self-respect, in peace. A life where I choose myself every single time. Because in the end, that's the real love story here. The one I'm writing now, one chapter at a time, one healed piece of my heart at a time. The woman I am today isn't the woman who walked into that therapist's office. She's not the woman who begged for emotional crumbs. She's not the woman who believed love meant staying no matter the cost. She is the woman who stayed true to herself, who stood up, who walked out, and who never looked back. And if you're watching this, maybe this is your reminder. You deserve someone who chooses you, without hesitation, without conditions, without looking over their shoulder for someone else. And if they won't, then choose yourself, choose freedom, choose peace. Because the moment you do, that's the moment your real story begins.